Hello, everybody, and welcome to another SIG Windows meetup. It's the 8th of December, and as always, it's a recorded conversations, so please adhere to the CNCF Code of Conduct. I am sorry I do not have as cool of a hat as Jay. I think I do have one around, but I need to wear it for when I used to travel up north in the US. But Jay, love the hat.
Cold here, man. I don't know. It just felt good on my head.
It does. It just keeps you warm. We have a couple of other folks from the Valero team earlier. They're like in the 10, 20 degrees temperature, and their fingers are freezing. So let's go to our agenda, folks. One of the things I want to kind of poll really quickly. This year has been pretty tough for everybody. With COVID. Virtual conferences, everything that's going on with work and personal lives throughout the world, social justice issues. I'm thinking that we likely can cancel the last two meetings of the year, December 22nd and 29th. Is there anybody that has any significant objections to than that? All right, so we will execute on that. So no SIG Windows meeting on December. What was the date I wrote here? Sorry, 27, 29. I will cancel the meetings if you're getting them from your calendar. All right, Mark, new release out 20H2. Why don't you take us on that?
Yes, so there's a new Windows Server SAC or semi-annual channel release that came out, I think, in November last month. I wouldn't have normally raised that as an announcement here, but there is a little bit of confusion that this has caused due to a naming update that I wanted to call out and just mention to everybody. So previously the SAC releases were named like year, month. So you'd have 1809 and 2004. And we've decided to rename the SAC updates to be the year, and then the half of the year that it got released in. And this is done largely to avoid some of the confusion around the fact that Windows Server 2019 is older than Windows Server 2004, despite the numbers are newer. So there's a new naming scheme, and that's what it is. And the confusion that this is raised is there have been some images for Windows containers that are published to the MCR and other places that are still using the 2009 kind of nomenclature. And I wanted to just let everyone aware that those two tags are interchangeable. So if you see some container images that are published with the 2004 tag and some that are published with the 2009 tag, you can chain those together in a build and run them on the Windows Server 2000 H2 host.
Thank you, Mark. And very likely, Mark, probably the next, I don't know, we didn't change 1.20, so we still support 2004 in 1.20, right? We didn't change the official docs.
Yeah, we'll update, or we have some changes in the works to start building all of the container images that are used by Kubernetes and update those in the 121 PRs.
Yeah. Yep.
And also, I believe that I'm trying to find some public documentation. I'll drop that announcement in the SIG Windows channel too when I find it, so folks can see that there.
Yeah, if you search for 20H2, there's like some of the documentation on Microsoft is basically saying that this is the two SAC releases for this year, 2004 and 20H2. I like the 20H2 better than 2004. I was like Windows Server, version 2004.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to anything else on that, Mark?
Nope. If there's any questions, feel free to just ping a SIG Windows channel. We'll try and get them answered.
Excellent. Amber, you want to give us an update on privileged containers?
Yeah, so this is mostly to follow up on the last time we brought up privileged containers to kind of give people an overview. From the very beginning, we took a different kind of approach where we wanted to use job object containers. And that allowed us to kind of get access to a lot of different host services or networking and, and so on and so forth. One of the kind of issues that was brought up later as we were trying to approach 120 was the question about different service mesh scenarios, where originally our proposal was that we were going to go and require every pods that contain privileged containers to be entirely privileged. Folks brought up different scenarios in which aligning a privileged container with the pod compartment, and also enabling that privileged container in a pod networking compartment to have net admin access to be able to modify the host still within that same pod, is something that was essential for certain service mesh scenarios. We did a different pursuit of investigating this specific scenario, right? Like aligning with the pod compartment, and then if it's possible for us to get net admin access, and from that we delayed from 120 to 121. After a lot of investigation internally, we've decided to scope that out of this initial kind of push that we're going to go through for privileged containers. We're not, there's some assessment going on if this is something we could ever bring in, being able to align with the pod compartment. But as it stands right now, it would kind of involve a lot more investigation and work on our side, and is not kind of in scope for this current approach. So moving forward with 121, we kind of scoped down to for alpha, we're going to either go out with runtime classes or have a kind of pod spec update sort of included in alpha for 121. All of this work is kind of already included. It's prepared. We had this prepared for 120, but we did the assessment of this kind of pod compartment alignment at the time. And then once we go into alpha in that stage, we are going to continue to do investigation on pod compartments, but at least at alpha, it's going to be scoped here. And the kind of goal is to make sure that we get at least the basic functionality for privileged containers out in the open for people to be able to use and start being able to work with.
Very cool. Safe to assume that you're on track for review in alpha and version 1.21, given all the things you just mentioned?
Currently, there's nothing that would block that now. But there's still some logistical stuff that we'd have to get so that we're completely prepared. But we're getting to that stage and going through that process now. Luckily, we did a lot of this work, or some of the work already in 120, and there's some updates and refinement that we'd have to do to the KEP and so on and so forth. But otherwise, I think we're pretty much on track for that as well.
We should probably push the KEP for review as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I know the KEP review deadline will be sometime in January. I don't know if they've published them yet. I haven't seen an email yet. But once they publish them, it will probably be sometime in January. We should try to see if we can have the KEP ready to roll even now in December.
Yeah, and that's kind of our goal right now. So we kind of went through the process of coming to this decision. All of the work that we're kind of doing for the remainder of anytime actually people being available in December is going to be spent on getting us prepared for that. And we'll roll into January with hopefully all the ducks in the row. So
perfect. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate it.
And we would need, I think, SIG Windows help in once we have the alpha out. We probably want to test the scenarios that we think works and we have validated, or like we are putting in the proposal. But we want to make sure, because privileged container has a lot of dependency. I know Deep, you're thinking about CSI proxy. There's a lot of other stuff coming. So you want to make sure like what works in alpha, because now we're moving quicker and faster, like ahead. We can get the feedback earlier as well.
Yeah. So I
could be waiting to try it out. Definitely.
Yeah, I consider with every feature, sometimes you have to think about the killer app, right? For Windows, the killer app was Office. That's how Windows and Office kind of banded together and kind of dominated a big part of the industry. For this scenario, the killer for these privileged containers, your killer app is CSI proxy to begin with. I don't know if there's anything around the world of CNI that will be necessary here. That's worth exploring. But we need to find that killer app and kind of push for it, and CSI proxy seems to be that. So we need to band together for that.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question, Amber. So I'm just trying to make sure that we relay what we need to do with SIG network. So did you all decide that like we're not going to block on any API changes to SIG network, and you're just going to do some fancy Microsoft stuff?
So most of the changes for this particular implementation with the runtime class would only kind of be contained in like our HCS shim layer, basically. So it doesn't touch too many things, and like we can get it out in a form which wouldn't necessarily require too much assessment from like SIG networking or so forth. So we're trying to go out with like the lowest friction form in alpha. I think what we found, at least in a lot of discussions, is that like there's a lot of information that, you know, people bring up scenarios, people provide different inputs, but we're kind of all spinning our wheels trying to like think about how this thing would work. In reality, I think it'll be a lot easier once we get it out in alpha for people to kind of approach this with something in hand. So that is the goal, right? Like we're not trying to put too many. We will see if we have a good guess of what API changes or pod spec changes we have in mind that we can propose for alpha. If people have a huge allergic reaction to whatever we propose, we do have the alternative of runtime classes. Of course, like our team is still looking at where the best place within the pod spec to have it in for alpha is. But we do have a couple of options here. And it's mostly like we want to get, like, our goal is to get this out. However that kind of occurs, if we have more friction or less friction, is something that we're going to have to look at.
Okay, so it sounds like to me there's a black box solution that for you all is maybe it's not the best case scenario, but it guarantees getting something out there, and you're not blocked at all on SIG network stuff, which is great news, right? And then
yeah, well, we can be unblocked at least for alpha. I think once we consider the graduation from alpha to beta, that's when we're going to have a better understanding of what we want, where we want this to exist in the pod spec, right? And that's when things, you know, get real, I guess. And in that case, like we're kind of, you know, we're trying to unblock ourselves, or, you know, not stop spinning our wheels and just trying to get to alpha. We understand that there are some things to assess between alpha and beta, and like we're developing a checklist for this. We have like our in-between checklist, at least in our own minds. And some of that includes like, okay, you know, we've made a decision on certain networking scenarios, such as the one regarding the service mesh scenarios or aligning to a pod compartment. We've decided to rule this out, which is the way that I think SIG networking was leaning towards anyway, at least at this time. But just making sure we kind of have alignment there, just due to the meeting cadences, and like, you know, we're now in the holiday season, trying to get to January to get us rolling into 121. We're just trying to kind of get into a state for alpha that doesn't necessarily, wouldn't like, you know, raise too many hairs on people's like back of their necks.
And this is all controlled by SIG Windows, right? All the APIs we're changing are owned by SIG Windows at this point, right?
We believe so.
Yeah, not
the pod spec, but the rest of it, yes.
Well, I think specifically what we're kind of entertaining and what we're kind of circling around is having a privilege field on the Windows security context and not messing with any of the other pod security policies like host ports, host network, and that at this point.
Yeah, so it's totally self-contained, so nobody can stop us from doing this, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at, right? Is that this means there's nothing upstream blocking us, which is always the hardest part, right? So that's great.
Yeah, I don't think that there's going to need to be any like discussions or contentious arguments about like if the host network policies work the same on Windows or not.
There won't even be any arguments because it's a SIG Windows controlled thing, right? Period. Nobody can. Okay, great, cool. Sorry for oversimplifying. I just wanted to make sure I understood it.
No, I think that makes sense.
All right, we have a packed agenda. David, DSR update, please.
Yeah, sure. So Muzz informed me that there's some confusions on the DSR load balancing mode, so I wanted to give an overview again about the two different modes. Can I actually share my screen? That'd be okay. Host.
I'm trying to make you a co-host. Hold on.
Okay.
If I could find you on the list. Oh, you're by Elias. You're good to go.
Okay, great. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I actually have a little graphic here. So for Windows in kuproxy, we have two different load balancing modes. One is called DSR and one is called non-DSR, or well, it really doesn't have a name because it's the default configuration and the original implementation. So give an overview of what the traffic flows look like before we jumping into advantages and disadvantages. And the non-DSR flow and the default flow that kubeproxy uses for service traffic. Any service traffic goes through a host VNIC that was created previously during setup, which acts as a MUX and contains all the load balancing rules at the host VNIC, so that we select the right backend tip when trying to load balance traffic for service across backend pods. And as a consequence of the default implementation, this results in the kind of the source pod IP being obscured to the IP set in the host VNIC. So as you can imagine, this causes some surprise to users when they try to monitor packet flows and then they see incoming traffic is coming in as the host VNIC as opposed to the actual originating pod IP. In the DSR flow, that is the new mode where the IP fix-ups and all the load balancing rules occur at the pod or at the container vSwitch port directly, such that the service traffic arrives with the source IP set as the originating pod IP. So users can enable the DSR mode by passing the following flags to kubeproxy. And there's a few advantages to enabling the DSR mode. One is that there's a greatly reduced resource footprint and the consumption of ephemeral ports by essentially Kubernetes. So if you have 100+ services in your cluster, you should start thinking of transitioning to running kubeproxy in DSR mode, because in the default implementation, you could run out of ephemeral ports on the hosts, which can cause various networking issues and network connectivity failures. The other advantage is that there's a better data path performance and reduced network latency, since you don't have to go through the intermediary hop basically here and do all these expensive operations. The other advantage is that there's improved transparency of the network traffic flows. So the traffic flow is simpler, you can see on the right-hand side. And it is also recommended for Kubernetes network policies. So if you're using Calico or some solution like that, you should probably run kubeproxy in DSR mode. Otherwise, the obscuration that happens here can get cause issues when you're trying to apply network policies and you're trying to reach out through a Kubernetes service and the IP gets obscured. And also the DSR mode is required for advanced network configurations, such as client IP preservation or destination IP preservation. Now, the drawbacks of the DSR is that first and primarily, it is not as well tested as the non-DSR flow that has been there from the get-go, from the beginning. So there's actually one active regression here. Basically, the regression is that if you have DSR load balancer policies and you try to delete all the network resources, all the HNS resources on a node, you need to make sure that you clean up the policies before you delete the network belonging, like that's associated with those policies. Any questions on that point? Basically, you have to stop kubeproxy, then you have to remove HNS policies, and then you can remove the network. Previously, sometimes you could just delete the network and the non-DSR for non-DSR policies. That would be fine. It would clean up the policies itself. Everything would be gone. But in the DSR load balancing policies, you have to clean them up first before deleting the associated network. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is super helpful. We're talking in chat, David. We should probably do a KubeCon presentation here. But I think there's a lot of confusion. Do you want to cover it on like what works in 2019 with the Kubernetes 120? What doesn't work?
Sure. So yeah. So the next thing to consider is if you're using DSR mode, there's a special case where if a pod tries to access a service and the service redirects back to the pod itself, you need to add a configuration to your CNI. I actually have a link here. It's called loopback DSR. And you have to basically set this config inside, like you have to set this setting or this field in your CNI config. Otherwise, the traffic will get dropped for this special case. So that's one thing that has caused some confusion as to why is traffic being dropped if it's being redirected back to itself. Usually users try to like spin up one service and it's like redirecting back to itself, and they try to demo it and say, oh, well, pod access doesn't really work. So yeah, this needs to be added in the
There's
DSR
also
mode.
a flag into kube proxy too, correct?
This well, that's how you enable it originally.
Mhm.
So yeah, you need to pass. This is how you enable DSR mode. If you plan on using this flag, then also make sure you add this into your CNI config.
And to make
Then-
sure you're running with at least the Windows Server 2019 November security update or cumulative updates.
Yes. So yes, I'll get to the OS. There's one
Okay.
more thing. So DSR, if you want to use the advanced features like client IP preservation, you need to run in DSR mode. If you enable client IP preservation, routing mesh, so node-to-node forwarding will also not work. That's the same behavior as on Linux, to my understanding. So basically, what that means is if you have like the traffic, if a traffic hits a given node, you need to make sure that the pod is running locally on that node, since the traffic will not be forwarded across nodes because the client IP needs to be preserved. So I don't know if we have enough time. I could show maybe a diagram of sorts. I could open Paint or something. So if you have two nodes and you enable client IP preservation, and you have, let's say you usually have a load balancer, some external load balancer. In the DSR flow, if traffic is coming in, basically the node-to-node forwarding is disabled. So usually you might have, some pods here, and you might have, no, like the traffic could be directed to either node, right? And what I'm saying is, if traffic gets redirected here, it's not going to forward to this guy because the client IP needs to be preserved. If we did this, then the client IP would need to change. So you need to make sure that you have like your pods running on the target node locally. It will only load balance to this, on a per node basis, basically. So it's the same on Linux as well. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Hey, David, we're almost running out of time here
Okay.
as well. So a couple of things came up, David. You should submit a session for this on KubeCon independently to talk about networking in Windows and advances. If for some reason it doesn't get approved, then we'll probably dedicate either half or the entire SIG Windows talk for the next KubeCon for you to just do a networking deep dive. Like, level 400 networking.
Okay, fine. Yeah, okay, then the last thing, just really quickly, you need Kubernetes 1.20 for client IP preservation, 1.19 just for DSR mode, and you need to make sure you're running Windows Server 2019 and use at least the November Patch Tuesday update. And this
Thank
is
you, David.
Mark submitted a doc update to reflect that as well.
Cool.
So
Yeah.
if somebody's running 120 with 2019 November patch or 2004, they should have the client IP preservation and DSR. Everything should work for them if they are configuring it right, David?
Yeah, so the DSR mode will work for client IP preservation. There's one thing that is missing there. If you're using external load balancers, the health checks seem to not be implemented.
I see.
So Jeremy has a PR up for that. Let me link that in the discussion. And some of the tests are still failing there, so it's not been merged. I think next time we meet, we should discuss what we can do to land that either in a 120 minor release or in 1.21. We will help with that.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Sounds good. Hey, Maz, we'll skip the triage now
Yeah.
if you don't mind. We
Yes,
don't have
please.
time
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
And Mark, we can probably skip the Docker shim depreciation. Arvind, if you guys don't mind.
I
Since
was going to just mention that there's going to be a discussion in the SIG meeting immediately following this meeting to discuss some of the Docker shim deprecation. So if anybody's interested, please join the SIG meeting.
Okay. All right. So Arvind, do you mind if we push yours to next week, or is this we can do it in 1 minute?
No, we can push it to next week. No,
Okay.
no worries at all.
Okay. And we can probably talk, since the shortest, kind of going by the shortest item is the no problem detector. Jeremy, you want to give us a quick update?
Sure. So basically, I'm starting to submit the first couple PRs for it, and then I'll be handing it off to somebody that will actually be working on it for the portion of their time. But just real quick, if anybody has any feedback or anything they want to add to it, or if they want to contribute, please do so. The links are there, so you can click on them and dig in. And you can also reach out to me, of course, on Slack.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, everybody, we're right about out of time. Next week, Arvind, apologies, you and Maz and Mark will get your updates here. Well, thank you all. And I'll see you all for the last meeting of the year next week. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Bye, folks.